Now, things were changing around the world. The Industrial Revolution was beginning. And so silk weaving was very strong, but things were happening. In India, a different fabric was being produced, calico. Calico is quite an easy fabric to look after. Silk can be quite complicated, quite difficult to look after. And then, of course, in 1776, I believe it was, there's this small country, the name of which escapes me, but it was on the other side of the Atlantic. A few people from here had gone there and they'd settled down okay, had a bit of trouble with the locals, but they were doing okay. And they decided they could run things for themselves. So they declared independence. I doubt it ever came to anything. Oh, come on, please. I'm working hard here. But of course, the United States, well, it wasn't the United States, but America, they were producing cotton. And cotton, again, very much easier to manage than silk. So fashions were beginning to change. But nevertheless, the silk weaving industry had its ups and downs, but it was doing okay. The Industrial Revolution began to have an impact because, for no other reason, they were now able to have mechanical looms. Mechanical looms changed things. Prior to the Huguenots arriving, any kind of weaving that had gone, I grew up in Coventry, and Coventry has a long history, and way before motor cars and bicycles and the other things that Coventry was well known for, silk ribbon weaving had been an industry. It was a cottage industry, and miners' wives would produce silk ribbons to gain a little bit of extra cash for the family. But the Industrial Revolution changed all of that, and certainly with the introduction of steam power and steam-powered looms, it was now considered only a man's job to operate the loom. Sorry, ladies, you were thought not to be strong enough to manage these great big powerful looms. So men started to become employed into the silk weaving industry. And by this time, the silk weaving industry is no longer just in London, in Spitalfields, it's gone all over the country. Was burnt wood ever involved? Does anybody know in the silk weaving industry? Not. Pardon? Nails, right. Really?
Yeah.
In the world? I did not know that. Yeah, right. Could well be. Yeah, right. But certainly the weaving went right across the country. Leek was well known for its silk weaving. Macclesfield was a huge centre. Manchester stayed very much around cotton. Where I now live, Leicester, of course, was wool. But it spread, and it is now estimated that 75% of the population in England, certainly, have ancestors who were Huguenots. Such is the diversity, and such was the growth. Anyway, I digress slightly, but hey ho, it doesn't matter. So the industry is going up and down. But then along came the Napoleonic Wars, and all these men that are now weaving are shipped off to go and fight in the Napoleonic Wars. So what did? They let you ladies come and operate the looms, and by heck, you did a good job. So at the end of the war, the men come back, and of course the women are operating. They don't want to give up their income, but the men want the jobs back. Unfortunately for many of them, they've been injured so badly they can't come back and operate the looms anyway, which is a two-handed job, and fashions had changed. The final nail, as it were, in the coffin of the silk weaving industry in Britain came in 1870. Then the Prime Minister, Gladstone, and his Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lord Cobden, decided that it was time to end the trade embargo with France. The wars were over, we were getting on better with the French, so he ended the embargo. There was always a cachet about having your silk for your dresses from France. And the example for this I use, are you familiar with that TV series From Lark Rise to Candleford? Yeah. Do you remember the two ladies who had the shop? And there was one particular episode where they got ever so excited because they were about to get a delivery of silk from Paris. And that essentially is what's going on there. The trade embargo is over. They can now legitimately get their silk from Paris, and ladies will want to buy French silk because it's French, even though British silk was just as good in quality. But the other final thing was, or an additional thing to that was, by now, by the late 1800s, artificial man-made fibres were beginning to come on the market. And so in 1870, the census shows that in Spitalfields, going back to London, there were 50,000 weavers, silk weavers, and another 50,000 people also employed in the silk industry in some way. By 1930, so just 60 years later, there were only 4 silk weavers in Spitalfields, and that was replicated right across the country. So Macclesfield and other places had a similar decline, and the industry pretty much died away. Hasn't gone completely. Macclesfield are still producing silk, particularly ties which are very much with small patterns, which are very much favoured in the United States. What the current situation will have as far as that is concerned is too early to tell. So there are still pockets, but nothing like the industry that there was. And I'll tell you the secret because it is quite relevant to the to what happens next, as it were. There we go. You have that. I'll talk from my big one. So here we go. This is how it works. Of course, male moth, female moth. Now, the key thing about these moths, the Chinese have, is that microphone still working? Okay. The Chinese, over the 5,000 years they've been producing silk, bred a moth that were specifically for silk, a moth that would give the longest, finest, smoothest thread they could possibly manage. Now, that moth is known as Bombyx mori. More commonly, we refer to it as the mulberry worm or the mulberry moth, mulberry silk. That particular that particular caterpillar will only eat the leaves of the white mulberry, which is where King James went horribly wrong. The female lays about 500 eggs in one go. She lays them on mulberry. In China, the vast rooms are kept at a constant temperature, constant humidity, everything, constant daylight, everything is controlled with racks and racks and racks of mulberry leaves on which the moths lay their eggs. The eggs hatch, the caterpillar, like a pinhead size, then starts to eat the mulberry leaves. Now, because of the constant temperature, the constant humidity, and the constant light, the caterpillar is fooled into thinking it is dinner time 24 hours a day. How would you, young man, like to eat for 24 hours a day? No? My granddaughters would love that. So that's what they do. They just eat, and they put on 100,000 times their weight. Now, in my pictures, I have not stuck to the actual size of the moths and the caterpillars, but I've tried to keep the proportions roughly equal. So male moth is always smaller than the female moth. The caterpillar grows to be bigger than its mother. And when it's eaten solidly for 10 days or so, it can eat no more. It's 100,000 times heavier than it was when it hatched. All it wants to do is have a nap. It's a bit like me on a Sunday dinner time. So this is when they weave their cocoon, which I think is the most incredible bit of engineering imaginable, because note the caterpillar. It has no legs. It has no arms, certainly. All it is able to do is extrude this thread from its body. And the thread comes out already coated with something called sericin, which is a natural gum that it produces. And so all it can do is wriggle around to get this thread to wrap around itself. But it needs to completely cover itself. So basically, it needs to start on the outside and work in. Because if it starts on the inside and tries to work out, it's going to get itself all covered up. And then what does it do? It's an amazing piece of engineering how it does it. And I've no idea how it does. But it does. It wraps itself up. It then goes to sleep. Now, we used to think that the caterpillar then dissolved in the cocoon and then somehow re-emerged as a moth. Now we know that what happens is within the caterpillar, there is the DNA to produce wings, body, thorax, abdomen, antennae, eyes, whatever is required. And those parts change in order to produce the moth. Again, over about 10 days to a fortnight. When it's ready, the moth wants to eat its way out of the cocoon and fly off. This is the key. Just before the moth is ready to break out of the cocoon, the cocoons are either dropped into near boiling water or baked. That kills the moth, but it also loosens the fiber. And the thread can then be unwound off the cocoon. Now, obviously now there are some ethical issues around this. And I'm not here to debate the ethical issues. But what I will tell you is in the breeding of the Bombyx mori, and the Chinese silk is all Bombyx mori. Britain uses 90% of its silk is Bombyx mori. So Bombyx mori moth is both blind and flightless. So it's been bred to do one thing only, and that's produce this long, smooth, lustrous thread. Anybody like to tell me what they think the length of that thread would be when it comes off the cocoon? I can see one gentleman's put his head in his hands already. I don't think I want to answer that question, he said. Anybody, any ideas? And please don't say a lot, because, pardon? 3 miles. Bit of an overestimation, but good try. Yes, sir. 1 mile. Getting closer. It's about 900 meters. So you're not far off. 900 meters in length. And this is the crucial thing. If the moth cuts its way out, the threads then become much shorter. And they would then have to be attached together. As soon as you start attaching the 2 threads together, you get a little bump in it. So it loses its smoothness. And we're, sorry? Yes, the slub, yeah. Yeah, yeah, and that's what they're trying to avoid, so that the silk is always as smooth and fine as possible. That's how it's produced. Incidentally, worth noting that some companies in India and America have attempted to produce silk and still let the moth escape. And that's known as peace silk. And it sounds like a great idea, except they have discovered that they've then got millions of moths they don't know what to do with. And their solution was to crush them and turn them into animal food. So they end up dead anyway. It's kind of, it sounds good until you dig down a bit more, and it's no different. The process is really not much different. Anyway, so it is that long, thin, that long, smooth thread that can be woven, and you've got very few joins. Now, of course, with man-made fibers, that can be achieved easily because you can extrude a thread to any length you want. So those factors that I've mentioned, the Industrial Revolution, the changes in fashion, have all contributed, along with man-made fibers, to the demise of the silk industry. I'm told that it is almost impossible to tell the difference now between silk and a man-made fiber that's meant to look like silk. And the only sure way is to set fire to it. If it is silk, it will burn and it will smell like burning hair or fingernails, because essentially that's what it is. If it is man-made, it will melt. There is only one problem with setting fire to your silk wedding dress to find out if it's real. I'll leave that, you'll work that out. Right. Are there any questions? You've been incredibly attentive. Yes. That's a brilliant question. My hobby is painting and dyeing silk and producing things with silk. And about 20 years ago, I started going out and giving demonstrations of painting on silk. I then realized, although I know a little bit about painting on silk and dyeing silk, I don't know much about silk itself. So I sat down to try and research for myself. And I started, and mainly my research was online. Not the most reliable place to start, I learned quite quickly, because you suddenly find whole chunks being repeated across different websites where it's just been cut and pasted in. But anyway, that I started to find out a bit more and thought, hey, there's a story to tell. I've subsequently managed to find other sources and realized that pretty well all of what I've told you is fairly accurate with what we know, I'm pleased to say. But I can't verify any of it because I'm not an academic. I was only doing it for my interest. Never occurred to me to make a note of my sources. So I just come along and chat. But that's how I got into and thought this is a story to tell. Also, as I was doing this research, I realized I have some family connections in the silk ribbon weaving industry, at least. First of all, my father's parents, for a time, they lived in a cottage or a terraced house in Coventry on the Stony Stanton Road, if you know Coventry at all, which had an extra floor where and I heard some people talking about how we lived years ago, but their terraced house had this extra room in the roof, in the seat above the bedrooms before the roof, with a huge window in it. And I remember saying to my dad one day, why have grandma and granddad got this big attic? Because we children were always sent up there to play. And he said, oh, it was a top shop. At the time, it didn't occur to me to ask him what he meant by a top shop. But then I realized as I did the research, oh, that was used by probably or possibly Eli Green when he set up his company in Coventry for silk weaving, and he built houses with a steam engine at the end in the yard, and the steam engine powered the looms in each of these attics. You know more about it than me. So that was one. Now, I'd always known that my mum at the age of 14, she had left school, and she used to say she left school on a Friday, and on the Monday morning, her mum, my grandmother, marched her down to Cash's, a very well-known weaving company in Coventry at the time, and she got a job, set up a job. And Mum remembered her main job at Cash's, because she was there from 14 till she was 21, and her job was weaving cap badges for the Royal Navy. Obviously, this is a time we were leading up to the Second World War. And not long before she died, she asked me to clear out some photos that she'd got, and they were in frames. So I decided to look through them before I got rid of them. And I found this. And it is to do with the coronation of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. And it's from Cash's. I'll read it to you. Says coronation of their Majesties King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, May the 12th, 1937. In order to celebrate the occasion of their Majesty's coronation, the directors of Cash's, have decided to make a gift of 10 shillings. In 1937, 10 shillings, I bet that was a week's wages, if not more. Together with a specially woven souvenir to each employee in the service of the company. Wednesday, May the 12th, will be observed as a holiday, and employees will receive pay for this day. And it goes on into their normal. So you got 10 shillings, a day off, and paid for it. Marvellous. And it says right at the bottom, it says, in order to receive these gifts, you will be required to present the attached slip. J&J Cash Limited. There was no slip. So I can only assume, well, I know Mum got that, but I can only assume she got her 10 shillings as well. Good for her. So have a look at that. So Mum was a ribbon weaver in Coventry. Also, I've more recently discovered her mum was a weaver in a different company in Coventry, the name of which has escaped me, but I think before Cash's were making little pictures which were highly collectible, and there is a considerable collection of them in Greenway, which was it's a National Trust property, which was Agatha Christie's holiday home, now down near Dartmouth. Worth a look. So that's probably more than you wanted to know, but anyway. Any other questions? Yes.
You've said that along the line, where do they get the silk from?
China. They were all having to import the silk thread from China throughout, time. Bit I haven't yet come across any information, and it's got to be there, is the involvement of the East India Company in importing silk into this country. They've got to be involved in it, but I haven't found anything else. But yeah, all of that silk is coming from China. Yeah, and still does.
Quite a few industries which were centered in London, they spread from there because of restraint of trade, because of the guilds and all that. Did that apply to silk as well?
Well, they set up their own guild, which was how they were able to lobby Parliament. I don't honestly know the answer to your question, but I rather suspect possibly two things. Although Britain had a reputation for being more liberal-minded than France around religion, whether they encountered prejudice, and felt, well, let's move, or if it became overproduced in London, so let's move somewhere else and do the same thing. I don't know the answer to it, but I think possibly both are reasons for moving out. But what I have come across, and I find quite fascinating, that even little villages that you wouldn't think would have had an industry, you often find Silk Lane as a name. And you think, well, where's that come from? And the chances are there would have been a mill down that lane at some point, and that would have been a silk weaver, possibly a mill that had been used for something else before, but it certainly went all over. Yes. It added to it. Is everybody familiar with the jacquard? No. Whoa. Right. Allow me. I can't remember his first name, but Jacquard, a Frenchman, he came up with most of the looms were able to produce plain weave silk, or when I say plain weave, not simply plain weave, but flat weave silk. He came up with a process by which you could put a pattern on the fabric. So these are a couple of photos from Macclesfield. So here is and I'll pass these around. So here's some cloth on a loom, but you can quite see it's got a raised pattern to it. And his process, long before the invention of the computer as we know it, was a punch card system. So he put the design onto graph paper. That was transferred onto punch cards, and the punch cards were able to control the sheds. So some threads are lifted up, some were pushed down, and so when the shuttle passed through, it went in front of some threads, behind others, and then you had this raised pattern appearing. So it was a brilliant invention, and just by letting the punch card run through, this pattern would emerge. So the weaver just kept passing the shuttle through, changing it for a different color when necessary, and the punch card did the rest. And the power looms, they made it even simpler, because now they didn't have to, the weaver didn't have to stop, just kept pushing, the thing was shot through, the shuttle was passed through time after time after time. It just, the noise from a working loom was incredible. So who asked that question? Jacquard. Yeah, does that answer your question? So it added to the industry because they can now produce a wider range of silk, and the power looms didn't detract from the industry as such, but it did affect employment because fewer people were needed. As far as Coventry was concerned, and I go on about Coventry because that's where I lived. I will show you that one. I'm over my hour.
Yeah. We need to start
winding up. Okay. Yeah, got that the right way around. This Dutch engine, as it was known, it was a hand loom, but what it did, instead of just producing one ribbon at a time, the threads came in at the top. They were divided up into 6 lots. So 6 ribbons could be produced at one time. Still plain weave, but you see what I mean? That whereas one woman would produce one woman would produce one ribbon, one person could now produce 6. Okay, unless there are any more questions, I'll shut up.
I think we need to thank Clive in the traditional way for a very entertaining talk.
Thank you very much.